Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be covering World War I for AP European History. So it's going to be kind of my PowerPoint, how I teach it and how I go over it. If you want this PowerPoint, there's a link on the actual video channel that you can actually click and get a copy. Okay? But again, my name is Mr. Sakowski. It's Mr. Sakowski's History Channel, and we're covering World War I. Now, World War I is from 1914 to 1918. Duh, right? Like, says it right there. Now, some things to think about. This is from our actual book, so I think it's a little bit different if you have a different textbook, but this is McKay. And some things to think about World War I before you even jump into it. First off, it's called the Great War, not because it's great, because war is great. It's great because of how much carnage and how much it affected actual society, and how you actually see the breakdown of war into another level. Because there's always been war in history, but World War I is different from any other war because it's the first to be basically industrialized. Okay, meaning this is after the Industrial Revolution, and the countries that get together have industrialized manufacturing of weapons, and that's something that's never seen before on the battlefield. So the carnage that's seen through machines that are made for their sole purpose of killing people is actually seen for the first time with human eyes in history, and that's why it's called the Great War. Now, a couple things to go before this. The Treaty of Versailles. Prior to World War I, Europe was ready to basically and willing to go into war. So some things that people don't really realize, that war at this time was almost like romanticized. So people were like, wars, it might be a good time for a war. Not like, I'm not saying that was a normal thing, but it wasn't something to be like, to be completely fearful of, right? It wasn't so, it was just something that was happening normally in everyone's society every so often. So it wasn't like a complete, everyone was anti-war at the time, and people were like, had this understanding that if they went to war, it was something that was a part of life. And the deeper thing of thinking about World War I was that they didn't realize how long World War I would be. Okay, they thought usually wars lasted a couple of weeks, maybe a month. They didn't realize that this war was going to be 4 years long, and millions upon millions of people would die, and cities would be basically shelled to rubble, basically bombed to rubble, like nothing's there anymore. They didn't realize this. This is not how wars were always fought. The world ended up becoming longer. Now, the way that historians like to break this up is that there are four major reasons for World War I, and the four main reasons, is spelled through the word main. There's military buildup, right? The idea of this is after the age of imperialism, so you have that linked up in here. Imperialism and military are connected because if you have a vast empire, you're going to need some sort of bodyguards to protect it. Thus, you're going to create a military bodyguard to protect your empire. So through imperialism, economic competition, and then being fearful of your economics, your money, your trade, building up your military, really start to boil up the tensions in the world prior to World War I being unleashed. On top of it, there is these things called the alliance systems that were happening. Now, the alliance systems are something to think about. Basically, it's preservation of peace in Europe, and it was in the idea of, the best way I could put it is like safety in numbers. What ended up happening was countries kind of started to become buddies of other countries, and the way they saw this is instead of being an independent country, if you have more countries being your friends, alliances, right, an ally, then people would be more wary of attacking you, right? Because there's safety in numbers. I have more friends here. But what are you going to do if you have, if you see me having more friends on my side? Well, you're going to figure out how to get more friends on your side. And then basically, and this is also kind of specific for Europe, or even if it's for European history, but even for AP World History. But it's centered in Europe because this is the age where Europe has all the empires all around the world. And now in Europe, they're kind of becoming buddies with each other. And they're doing this to preserve the peace. But what it ends up doing is it's the perfect background. It's the perfect reason for really bringing the whole world into a war. Now, why is that? Is because, yes, safety in numbers, if there's a bunch of numbers of people on this side and a bunch of numbers of people on this side, they're not going to want to get into a fight individually. But if something does start off, now it's no longer two countries fighting each other. Now this country has to get this country's back, and then this country needs someone to get its back, and then this country needs someone to get its back. And by the time you know it, the whole world is engulfed in a war, right? So something that normally would take these two sides maybe a couple weeks to get a war over, as horrible as that sounds, now the whole world is brought into this war. And one of the things that's inspiring for countries at this time is the sense of nationalism. Now, nationalism is something that's kind of new. It's after the unification of Germany and unification of Italy. You see it was in the French after the French Revolution. You see it being inspired throughout Europe, but this is also just everything in history has a double edge to it. So this is more important to think about that. Yes, nationalism is pride, being born in one country. You think of rights, you think of equality, and so forth. You think of land, that's also pertaining to it, right? But now, when you set up these ideologies, there's also the inferencing of protecting your ideologies, protecting your freedoms, protecting your country, protecting your borders, all this other stuff. And now that's something that really cuts the it really creates a line of tension for other areas or other people, or kind of puts us against them kind of ideology, right? Like, I'm an American, you're a German, like he's an Italian, she's English, right? So it's kind of like that kind of ideology. It's just something to know that it basically plays a major part in World War One, of defending one's nation and having pride in one nation. Now, it's important to say, because now you're not going to go to war because, your leader or your king or your emperor told you to go to war. Now you're going to go to war because I'm fighting for my country, right? I'm fighting for my nation, right? And that's important to think about, but that's a different reason than 400, 300 years ago, people wanting to fight for their nation. There's no such thing as fighting for your nation, right? So that's something to think about, how nationalism plays a key in inspiring people to fight in this epic world war. Again, I covered this militarization, basically to protect your goods. Countries become militarized. And one thing that they incorporate here, this is a very fancy history term, it's called conscription. Basically, it's a fancy way of saying you're drafted. Everyone knows that from Vietnam, the idea of you were incorporated. So now your king can't tell you to go to war, but now your government can say you're going to war, and I'm going to conscript you. You are now of the age of, usually it's like men of a certain age, and if they're viable to fight, then and they're part of that country, then you actually have to go fight. And if they don't, then they can be considered AWOL or be thrown in prison or something else and worse, depending on what country it is and what time frame it is to these people. So conscription is a very fancy word of saying someone gets drafted. Here, alliances, the two major alliances that Europe basically breaks up into are the Triple Alliance, which consists of Austria, Germany, Italy, and then the Triple Entente, which consists of Britain, Russia, and France. Now, to understand as World War I goes forward, Russia here actually goes through its own revolution, the Russian Revolution, and it pulls out. And you're like, well, that's not really a fair number. But what ends up happening is America gets pulled into World War I, and once they get pulled in, they kind of replace Russia in a way, and they also kind of like put extra energy, more manpower into it, and that really also helps turn the tide of World War I. But right now, off the bat, there's these two big alliances, the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. These are just the flags. You can kind of look at them and get a visual representation. Imperialism, again, is the idea, I'll link it up to another PowerPoint, of empires growing out of Europe and how they're basically trying to maintain their economic prowess over the world, right? Their connections, their tentacles, kind of way. There's a lot of imagery of that in this age. And the idea of nationalism, being fighting for one's country, us versus them, and then basically split up into different things. Now, the new types of weapons that really change the face of war are these new weapons that are industrialized. Remember, before this time frame, there were guns, but there were like a powdered muskets almost. So you gotta think of it like, some guy with a tube and like a trigger, and he has to put like gunpowder, like the Looney Tune cartoons, and pack down the powder, and then like have a wick and light the wick and kind of like aim. It takes like a minute to load the gun, kind of thing, right? If you're really good. Now these machines, these guns and airplanes later, and zeppelins and tanks and all this stuff, machines that were once only swords, guns that were not really accurate and could fire a lot of bullets, and horses, basically animal power, were the major things of fighting in wars. You had shields and armor and stuff like that, but it wasn't like this age changes everything, because there's been a period of time where now weapons are going into a tech advantage, right? This is also one of those sprite terms that you gotta think of. The technology part of it is huge here, because this is the first industrialized war, so it's also referred to that, or the Great War. And basically, this is the first time machines were made to kill people at a massive scale, which people were not aware of prior to going into this, seeing this kind of car. They weren't ready for this kind of carnage. No one knew that it was going to be like this kind of thing. So you have things like rapid fire machine guns that can now just mow people down. You have the long range artillery, which would send bombs that just blew up. You have poison gas, something that would basically burn, choke people. You have a lot of imageries of people wearing gas masks this time. And as the war continued, new types of mobilization of units actually was created. Tanks were later on created by the British, which were basically used to push through no man's land. But they had the first onset of airplanes and submarines were being utilized to a good capacity during World War I, more so than ever before. Now, airplanes are more reconnaissance, and submarines were there. They were actually able to torpedo. Submarines are a lot older than people kind of realize. The first one was used in the American Civil War, the Turtle. It's a very funny one to look at. But now it's actually being like a forceful tool for military use, right? U-boats is undersea boots, which is the first version of the submarine, and that's basically created by the Germans. This is some illustrations of it. You can see the long-range artillery. You can see the rapid-fire machine guns. Here you have a Zeppelin. So Zeppelin is basically a flying, it's a big hot air balloon, if you want to think of it like that, that moves, and it was able to drop bombs coming off of it, right? That was one of the used things for the bombing of London, especially in England. Here's this undersea boot. This basically goes under the water, pops up, shoots a torpedo, and then goes back down. These were really scary for the people, the people in the ships right now, because the Navy, because they weren't used to fighting someone that you couldn't see pop up out of nowhere and then go back down. Both sides used aircrafts. The first aircrafts were people just flying with a handgun, trying to like shoot and fly an airplane. I can't even imagine how crazy that is. Then they put machine guns on top of them. They got into like dogfights, and the airplane, the pilots were known as aces here. So like that's kind of something that evolves. Now we have drones, airplanes that fly without people in them. But the first ones were people to do reconnaissance to see where the bombs were or whatever, and then kind of come back. And if they saw someone else out there, they had a handgun and they would kind of like fight. But reality was just to see and then come back. Then eventually they put guns on them, and now they start fighting in the middle of the air and having these dog fights, and it becomes what you think of like, airplanes that are basically kind of getting into like cat and mouse games and fighting all the time even today. Submarines were being used, again, U-boats, dog fights, zeppelins. These are all kind of things that we kind of get. Here it's important because this first, going back to this one, this is why I have it here, is that the U-boats, to capture a U-boat popping up, it's safety numbers. Originally, these ships were going in single, maybe two, but now they're going in this idea of a convoy, safety numbers. And the British tanks at Ypres, basically, this is the first version of a tank used. It was just used to push down the fortifications of no man's land, barbed wires and stuff. It wasn't really used for the idea that we think of a tank like sitting there with a machine gun in each cannon, even though it had machine guns up here. The main purpose of this was to break through any barbed wires or any type of barricades, and then the troops would go behind it and be able to funnel through. The airplane again, and they had flamethrowers and grenade launchers, so it's pretty interesting to think this is poison gas. The problem with poison gas too, people don't really realize, well, I mean, you do realize, is that they basically bend this type of stuff after. So as you can see here, you have no control over the wind once you put an actual poison gas bomb somewhere. So you might be trying to hit some troops over here, but you don't realize that the wind shifts on you, and now there's like a small town over there that you really didn't mean to hit, but now those people are all gone because of these issues. So they make them outlawed. So what really starts off World War One? Now, what really pops it off technically, the thing that they love to say that sparks the powder keg of World War One is the assassination of this Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Okay, people have been assassinated throughout history, so it's not the assassination in itself that really sparks a world war where massive millions amounts of people die, because that doesn't even make sense. But what it does is it sparks, you like light a firework, right? They think of it like that. That's the powder keg that they're talking about, like a Looney Tunes like barrel full of gunpowder, and they light it. This is what lights the firework, but it doesn't like just boom off the actual forefront. It's like people don't really pull back from this thing that kind of like starts to tip people going into the war. It's like the tipping point, or the straw that breaks the camel's back. This is a perfect illustration of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So in 1914, he was basically the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, so he's part of that alliance system in there. And he was assassinated by Serbian revolutionaries on his way visiting Bosnia, right? Sarajevo. So this is basically the capital of Bosnia that he's visiting. The Serbians are basically trying to fight for their own country nationality, right? Nationalism, a main cause of it. And he's kind of up there, knowing the threats are there, but he's kind of like rolling through this area to show his dominance as the heir, the actual king of this throne. Now, this is linked to other PowerPoints in the past and videos I'll do. So you'll see how the rise of nationalism is a real thing. But here I'm just going to allude to it in this PowerPoint. Now, even though there were attempts on his life, basically a fanatical group comes around called the Black Hand. Rivo Principe was basically the person of this, like you can think of it like a secret organization or a Black Hand or a terrorist organization that was really trying to kill this person to show that the Serbians want to be basically their own country. They don't want to be dominated by this bigger Austro-Hungarian ruler or this type of rule over their people and their country. So he takes the opportunity. He sees the two, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, and he goes to the car. They stop. Boom, boom. Kills them both dead. And basically he said he was a young Yugoslav nationalist, and he wanted Yugoslavs to unify from Austria, meaning the idea of Yugoslavian, anything that was like Slavic, breaking away basically from the Austrians. So he's part of the Serbian, is one of the Yugoslavian, like the Slavic people. He's really trying to break away from them, and that's the whole idea of it. Now, what action did basically created this tension, this ripple in the European alliance system? People don't really back out, and some countries are actually motivated to go into World War I because they see it as a perfect excuse to get lands and territory and other things for own personal motives. In countries that are on the opposite side of the alliance system, and instead of just starting a war just for those things, now this is the perfect excuse to kind of say, you know what, I kind of have a beef with this person. Maybe I'm going to go back there and start it off. So the war in the Balkan at this time was something that was basically wasn't far-fetched. This area of the Balkan Peninsula, which is a very famous area, it was ready to pop off at any time. But this is one of those times that like it pops off, but it ends up, instead of just being located in this area where there's Archduke Austria-Hungary, the Serbians that are trying to break away, and then they kind of just deal with it and like let go. What it really does is it intertwines this whole bigger issue here. Now, the Serbians, the nationalities of this group of people is not the one that really is part of the alliance system. If I go back just a second. Sorry. Because this is a great illustration, because you're like, well, Mr. Sokowski, why is this so important, right? And this is important is because this is Austria-Hungarian side here, so that's one part of the Triple Alliance. So where's Serbia? Serbia is not really part of the Triple Entente on this side, but there's this thing called Russia. Now that's Mother Russia. And Mother Russia has this thing that it's called Pan-Slavism. And Pan-Slavism is literally saying, I am the biggest Slavic country. I am Mother Russia. And to protect any Slavic nations from any threats out there, I will stand up for my Slavic brothers. So don't mess with them. And now that's what really gets things kicking off between Russia and Austria-Hungary, and then this whole thing kind of gets pulled into it. So it's the idea of nationalism through Russia, Pan-Slavism, Serbian nationalism, and now this Austrian-Hungarian side that's on this side. Other countries are kind of like, maybe this would be a good time for me to kind of get back at my old beef, settle some scores, the German and the French. Usually you have the duking it out kind of thing. So they usually kind of get into wars throughout history. So this is the time, and this is the idea of Pan-Slavism really pulling this into fruition. Ottoman rule, the idea is basically Serbians, Bulgarians, Albanians, and others were basically kind of trying to break away from the old empire, the Ottoman Empire. It's important for AP Euro to know that if there is an Ottoman Empire technically there, then you know it's World War I or before in European history if you see it on the map. If there's no Ottoman Empire there, then you know it's post-World War I. And now in AP European exam, they'll give you details from World War II, the Cold War, the world today, the global age that we're in today, the digital age I like to call it. So you need to know that there is importance in details that you need to kind of figure out, especially if they give you a map. The Ottoman Empire will be like one of those things to kind of like make a note of, like, why are they showing the Ottoman Empire now? And then comparing with a map later, they're probably talking about World War I, or it's for sure it's a good indicator that this is a map pre-World War I, just for your understanding of it. Now Serbia was ready to rise to become an independent, and thus the idea of Pan-Slavism, Mother Russia, protecting this little Serbian Slavic country was the reason why they kind of stepped up for their little brother. And it still doesn't really kick off, but this is that Pan-Slavism again. It doesn't kick off because really what ends up happening is there's these series of negotiations that it basically creates. So there's the assassination of this guy, and then they get into talks. Like, they don't just start fighting. They just be like, okay, let's talk this out because we need to figure out this problem and get through the situation. So prior to World War I, there were already two Balkan Wars. The first Balkan War in 1912, the second one in 1913. So this was a place that was already volatile, already from the kicking off. Now the problem with this assassination is that after this assassination on July 23rd, Hungary-Austria gave Serbia, this little area that's being ruled under them, an ultimatum. What I love to tell my students is that once you give someone an ultimatum, you're really just drawing a line in the sand, and when people do that, there's really no good outcome, because now you're like, look, I'm closing my lines of communication. You know, when someone says do this or else, like, it's usually going to be some, like 9 times out of 10 times that happens in my life, there's going to be something bad happen. It's not going to be, oh, let's just, talk it out now. Like, no, the talking out is over. So they basically did this harsh ultimatum on them. They say that they wanted Serbia to take the full blame for the assassination and give up whoever was part of that plot to kill them. And what ends up happening is Serbia can't even comply to what is happening at this time. And basically, while these negotiations are going nowhere, the Russians realize that they even become the mediators between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. And they're like, hey, we're really etching for a war. And Austria-Hungary is not lessening its ultimatum of basically giving up the people that were part of the terrorist plot and taking full blame for it. Now, it was a very harsh one because they're like, look, just give up anyone that was involved in anything and basically subdue everything, which was really like encroaching on a lot of people's freedoms in Serbia. And Russia's like, I don't think this is going to really go anywhere. Like, this is looking bad. So to protect my own stuff, I'm going to start to mobilize my war, mobilize my troops, my military. And when you mobilize your troops, you're really just getting them prepared and geared up, ready for a war. Now, they're doing this more for protection, but they're also doing it for defense. And while this is happening, was seen as a declaration of war, because now the Russians are getting their military gear ready, and now Austria, Germany, and Austria-Hungary and Germany are now seeing that as basically a threat to their actual safety. So now the tensions are actually, the negotiations are going nowhere, and now the tensions are rising to a point that they realize there is no there's really no going back at this point. Now, going back to this actual before I forget, like, subscribe, do all that jazz. Before I go into the next part right here, I just want to say that Germany as a problem before World War I pops off. Okay, and this is why Germany does this thing called the Schieffelin Plan. Okay, this plan named after Alfred von Schieffelin. Is that, and then I'm going to leave it off here. This will be my part 1 of World War I covering, and then I'll do the next PowerPoint slide and add that in and link it into this video. So then that way you guys can see these PowerPoints go from different parts going forward. Okay, so I'm going to end it with the Schieffelin Plan and why the Germans start the Schieffelin Plan here. So if you see here, this is a kind of a weird map of Europe, but I think maybe I can find another one for you. Usually I put maps in here too, or maybe not. Let's see if I can find one in the future. I guess this one will have to do. Yeah. I apologize for that. Usually I should have a European map for Europe, right? But okay, so this is where Germany is. Alright. France, Britain, Russia, Italy, Spain. Don't really need to worry about Spain. These are the big juggernauts. Austria-Hungary. These are the big juggernauts that are part of this area here in the middle. Alright, these are the ones that are really kicking off World War I. And the reason why this is important to realize is, first off, you need to know where your people are for your actual countries, and you're going to get a European map. So you need to study it in detail, because that's going to be one of those things that it's AP Euro, so you need to know your AP European map. So going back to the Schieffelin Plan, and then I'll start back up with the Schieffelin Plan for the second part of the video, is that Germany is stuck between a rock and a hard place. That's basically it. You have France here, you have Russia here, and it's stuck in the middle, right? It's not as friendly as Italy here, because Italy's like kind of like has some water and some protection. It's literally stuck between two enemies. And it's got two enemies it has an enemy on each side, right? Now this is a problem, is because they realize that if they're going to get into a war and I have two people that I'm going to be fighting on either side of me, it's already like a losing battle. So preemptively, to actually combat this issue before World War I really pops off, they realize that they can't wait for World War I to start, because if they wait for World War I to start, both of those countries will just come in and crush them, right? Like squish them, like, basically like a sandwich kind of thing. Okay, so again, I'll start off with World War I, the Schieffelin Plan, with part 2 of this video. And then, like, subscribe if you like the PowerPoint. The whole PowerPoint will be on the paid teachers site, so you guys can get it from there. And yeah, thank you for watching.